none of us would be involved in this thing without William McIlvanney, who's really one of the great novelists, one of the great Scottish novelists, one of the great modern British novelists. And when I read The Big Man as a novel, I was immediately struck by a whole host of things which really hadn't come through in movies in Britain that I'd seen. One of which was, it was an incredibly contemporary story about men in a particular working class area of Scotland, but it had lots of dignity and poetic aspects to it. Much more like an American novel, I would say, than a British novel, which is usually more metropolitan or involved in manners or this kind of thing. This was a real tough, gutsy, sort of noirish book, but full of poetic ideas about fate, about what character is, what haunts decisions, what haunts choices, what makes relationships work, what communities are. All these kind of things are in the book, and obviously we tried to get to some of those in the movie. You have to remember that when I first read the book, we were actually in the height of Margaret Thatcher's pomp and ceremony, and the miners' strike, which was really a kind of civil war in Britain, was really quite close to the thing. So when I read the book, even though it wasn't set during the strike itself, it was just an obvious thing to me to set it from there, because people hadn't done anything about that. You know, it was this huge gash and tear in the entire society that I was living in, but there was nothing about it. And when I read The Big Man, I saw it immediately as this sort of noirish story, and you see here the sort of the grim fields of Ayrshire and the car going through it. And what it immediately reminded me of was one of my favourite Hemingway short stories called The Killers. And there are two movies made of that, a 1946 one, I think, with Burt Lancaster and Ava Gardner, and then a 1964 one by Don Siegel with Lee Marvin and lots of others, including Ronald Reagan and so forth. The great thing about The Killers in the story, very short story, and the movies of that, they're about two men coming to a far-off diner of a small town, and they just want to find a guy. They go to a diner, they're slightly menacing, and they just want to find a guy and come and see him. And the young kid who realizes that these guys are something very bad is going to happen, he rushes off to the guy who is just asleep on his bed and says, there are two guys there, they're coming to get you. And the guy doesn't do anything, and the young kid is shocked. He says, why don't you run? Why don't you get away? He says, it wouldn't make any difference. You know, I've done a bad thing. And in the 46 story, he was a boxer who had, fought against the mob, etc., and that kind of thing. And in the other movie, he's a sort of racing car driver who had come up against villains trying to fix the business he was in. But the beginning of The Big Man is really a sort of an echo of that. And I think originally we started with a thing much more directly from The Killers, of the two guys coming to visit him, in fact to kill him at the end of the story. And then we would go back to how did it start. So the first draft of the screenplay was very much, there wasn't going to be suspense in this about what was going to happen to them. We would know right from the beginning that this guy was a marked man, and the drama of the story was going to be how and who out of all the people you meet were going to attack him, betray him, befriend him, cheat on him, stand loyal to him, etc.